corporations that produce my printer made it break down this morning, so I'm going off a BlackBerry. Forgive me if I'm so new age in the 21st century. I've also got a bit of a cough. Before we go any further, can we make some noise for some people who've really inspired me personally? And I saw them on the front of the Financial Times this morning. They are the brave people of Bahrain who are really resisting. Those evil cuts, but what they're resisting is on a different level altogether. And Libya, and Egypt, and Tunisia, and the entire Middle East. But of course, we're the best. We don't believe in democracy in the Middle East, do we? Fighting the cuts. Let me get to the subject. Short of time. If I was Ed Miliband, and I'm writing a biography of him, I'm doing so much reading about his background, sometimes I feel like I am him, and that's a weird feeling. If I was Ed Miliband, John, forgive me, let me imagine I was Ed Miliband for a day. What I would do is on Monday morning I would hold a press conference in Church House in Westminster. I would invite all of the press, broadcasters, TV cameras, lobby journalists. I would stand at a podium like this, and I would flank myself with three men. Joseph Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, and Christopher Pissarides. And I would then invite Joseph Stiglitz, the 2001 Nobel Prize winner for economics, to step forward and address the press. And he would say, as he said to me in an interview in February last year, "You're crazy. The debt situation has been worse in other countries at other times. This is all scaremongering. It's out of touch with reality. Under the current framework, these cuts will lead to higher unemployment." Then I would invite Paul Krugman, the 2008 Nobel Prize winner for economics, to step forward. And he would say, as he wrote in the New York Times last October, "The British government's plan is bold, but it boldly goes in the wrong direction." Why is the British government doing this? The real reason has a lot to do with ideology. As an excuse to downsize the welfare state. Never mind that British debt as a percentage of national income is actually lower than its historical average. Never mind that British interest rates stayed low, even as the nation's budget deficit soared. So what happens now? Maybe Britain will get lucky, something will come along to rescue the economy. But the best guess is that Britain in 2011 will look like Britain in 1931. Then I would invite Christopher Pissarides, 2010 Nobel Prize winner for economics, and he would say at this podium, as he wrote in the Mirror last October, "The Chancellor is taking risks with the recovery. These risks were not necessary at this point. He could have outlined a clear deficit reduction plan over the next 5 years, postponing more of the cuts until the recovery had become less fragile, and his unwillingness to further tax the well-off is inevitably necessitating more cuts to benefits just when the jobless need them most." And once these three men had spoken, I, as Ed Miliband, would step forward, stare into the barrel of the nearest camera, and I would say, "Which of these three men, Mr. Cameron, are you calling a deficit denier? Which of these three men... Mr. Osborne, do you think you know more about economics then?" Because the coalition, in its economic policies, is all over the place. That's the great truth of British politics right now, that they don't want you to know. They're all over the place, and they're there for the taking. I've said this again and again. There is an open goal here for the two Eds, Miliband and Balls. And can I just say, the appointment of Ed Balls was crucial. Yes. Crucial to Labour to turn things around. When the WikiLeaks memo emerged about Mervyn King and his private support for deficit reduction before the election, I went to Alan Johnson for a comment. I was told that Alan Johnson wouldn't comment on this. On Thursday, Ed Balls made his comments very clear about Mervyn King in the Financial Times. Now, welcome. The Tories are all over the place. Have you noticed? David Cameron stands up at Prime Minister's questions. He says, "You can't knock a plan if you don't have a plan. You can't knock a plan if you don't have a plan." The next day, Nick Clegg goes on the radio and says, "Our cuts aren't that bad. Labour were going to make cuts almost as bad as we were." It can't be both ways. That Labour were going to make the same cuts you were going to make, but they don't have a plan for deficit reduction. They are all over the place. And yet, the glaring inconsistencies, the brazen dishonesty, hypocrisy, inconsistency is left. It's left. That's our political journalists. That's the intellect, or lack thereof, and right-wing bias of our media that allows this nonsense to be peddled. So when George Osborne, for example, stands up at the Tory conference last October, And he said, and I quote, "On one side there is the IMF, the OECD, the credit ratings agency, the bond markets, the European Commission, the Confederation of British Industry, the Institute of Directors, the British Chamber of Commerce, the Government of the Bank of England, most of British business, two of our great historical political parties, one of the Miliband brothers, Tony Blair, and the British people. On the other side is Ed Miliband and the trade union leaders who put him there." Not quite Gideon. What a lot of journalists, shamefully my colleagues, allowed the Chancellor to get away with in that partial and disingenuous speech, is that on the other side is not just Ed Miliband and Len McCluskey, great figures at both arms. There's also, if you wanted to make a list, as I blogged at the time, Barack Obama, Ben Bernanke, Tim Wagner, George Soros, Warren Buffett, David Blanchflower, Martin Wolf, Samuel Britton, Anatol Kaletsky, Robert Skidelsky, and every single Liberal Democrat MP prior to May the 10th, when their leaders were accused. So I've got time's up, nearly up, quickly, 3 ways to resist the cuts. That's what we're here to talk about. Number 1, intellectually. Let's fight some of this economic illiteracy at the heart of the government. The people who talk about deficit, the people who talk about governments running like household budgets and the government's maxing out its credit cards. It's time to dust off your canes. It's time to understand the importance of aggregate demand. It's time to understand the importance of investment as a spur to growth and make the arguments for growth, which have not been made. Quickly, download the paper by Anne Pettifor and Victoria Chick, The Economic Consequences of Mr. Osborne. John, print it out, give it to all your shadow cabinet colleagues, especially the ones who like Anthony Darling's mad plan that we all cut as much of the Tories will, and give it to them to read and see what the truth is about deficit reduction. Number 2, judicially. It's not just intellectually. Judicially there are routes open. Who saw Michael Pipsqueak Gove humiliated in the High Court when the judge declared his cut to the Government Schools for the Future programme as an abuse of power because of his lack of consultation? There are other avenues open to councils, to the left, to the trade unions, to the Labour Party, to challenge these government cuts. And finally, politically, we have to stand up politically. The Labour Party has to lead the way. Every week in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's questions, Labour MPs should stand up and talk about the cuts in their community, talk about people who are suffering. Have to build a coalition. The left will not win this fight on its own. It has to be a broad-based coalition. I remember when I went on the anti-Iraq war protests in 2003, there were people carrying Daily Telegraphs under their arms who had never been on a march before. Those are the kind of people who need to be also involved in the cut. Call it the big society, if you will, to call it. That is what we have to do. And remember the most important argument of all, John touched on it already. Not only are these cuts economically illiterate, destructive, ideological, premature, unnecessary, morally wrong, they are also undemocratic. There is no mandate for cuts like the majority of the public sector. And the only silver lining right now in this depressing climate for me is that Canada, which is held up as a model of deficit reduction by this coalition, Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives were reduced from a 151-seat majority in 1993 to just 2 seats in Parliament. Let's make that happen in 2050.